This is video 1.5, and the goal of this video is to be able to create all four representations: graph, table, rule, and pattern for different tile patterns. So pay close attention to some hints and ideas that I have for you here. We will embark on using some of your previous knowledge, so make sure if you don't know certain things, you ask questions. But let's take a look at this first example. Remember, one more thing, this is your grad standard, so you have to do well in this standard in order to pass this class. If you have questions, keep asking, otherwise we won't be able to help you. So ask questions if you don't know how to do the problems. So example 1, use the pattern below to answer the questions. Letter A, draw figures 0, 4, and 5. So we have that picture there of figures 1, 2, and 3. We need to draw the next figures and the previous figure 0. I like to always build up and then I work backwards later. So I'll build figure 0 later. What I noticed about this pattern is from figure 1 to 2, it added that one little orange one that I colored there. And then 2 to 3, it also added in the same spot. Everything else stayed the same though. So I know the next picture will still have that box that stayed the same, because it's important to figure out what's staying the same and what's changing. That box of 12 tiles is still there, so I'm going to copy that. But now I'm going to have 4 tiles on that tail. Because, remember, the previous one had 3 on the tails, so this one has to have 4. Now I look at the next figure. That's, of course, figure 4. Figure 5, again, has that box that was 12 tiles, but now its tail is going to be 1 longer again. So instead of 4 tiles long, it's going to be 5. So here's my figures 4 and 5. Now if I want to work backwards to figure 0, I notice that I have to take off that orange tile because that was the pattern. Add that orange tile. Now I have to go backwards, so I take off the orange tile, and figure 0 is just that little rectangle with 12 tiles. So always when you're looking at patterns, look for what's changing and look for what's staying the same. Now for question B, make a table for the tile pattern. Here's what you need to remember about the table. The table is always X and Y, and X in these figures, in these patterns, is the figure number. Y is the tiles. So for instance, we have figures 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 drawn. We got to count the number of tiles in order to find the Y value. The number of tiles in figure 0 is 12 if I count those tiles. Figure 1, if I count, has 13. Figure 2 has 14. And so on. And I keep counting until I get all of the figures counted up. So figure 3 is 15, 4 is 16, and 5 is 17. So now I have a table. The table should be one of the easier parts, if you remember that X is the figure number and Y is the number of tiles. Now part D, writing a rule. So this is where we have to remember the following, that the rule always looks like Y equals MX plus B. Do you remember what M and B stand for? I hope so. If not, we're going to continue to review that this school year, but you got to get it memorized by the end of the year. M is the growth. So we have to look at the tile pattern and see how much it's growing by. B is the starting value, or figure 0, for these tile patterns. So now I look at all the information I have, the pictures and the table, to help me find these two numbers. So I look at the table and I look for how much it's growing by, and I see that it's growing by 1 tile. I can also see that in the picture, that orange tile that kept getting added. So my M value is 1. So 1x plus, now my B. My B value is the start, or figure 0. So I look at the figure 0 and I see 12 tiles, or I look at my table and figure 0 has 12 tiles. So 1x plus 12 is the rule, because 1 is the growth and 12 is figure 0. So I'm done with my rule. Now I have to graph the table. Graphing the table is also usually an easier part, but just be careful with your scale. Don't forget your X is your figure, and you want to label your graph, and Y is the number of tiles. Now we got to set up our graph. Since we only have to go up to figure 5, we could probably go every other line to set up my X-axis. My Y-axis has to go all the way up to 17. So I double counted, and it looks like this goes up to 17, so I'm going to go by ones. But notice I'm only marking every other because it's really crowded. So every other line I'm putting 2 and then 4 and then 6. But each line is representing 1. I just can't fit it on with my pen. Now I'm ready to graph. So I'm going to graph 0, 12. And of course that means I'm going to go over 0 and up 12, that red point. That's figure 0, 12 tiles. Then I go to figure 1, 13 tiles. So I go over to 1, up to 13 tiles. Then I continue on. Figure 2 has 14 tiles. Figure 3, 15, and so on. And it should make a nice straight line if the pattern is linear like this, the 1x plus 12. So I've got my graph, I've got my table, and I've got my rule. Now, you do not need to connect the points. Hopefully you've heard about discrete and continuous graphs. This is discrete, meaning it doesn't make sense to connect them because there is no figure 1.5. And when we connect, we assume that there's a tile pattern in between there. So you do not need to connect these for the tile patterns. The last question says, which figure will have 554 tiles? What we need to remember is x and y. X is the figure number, y is the number of tiles. So in this question, it's asking for x when y is 554. Gosh, that's a big number. I do not want to make a table. I don't want to make a graph, nor do I want to draw a picture of how big this figure would be. I want to use the rule. So I'm going to take the rule, and I'm going to put 554 in for y, because that's the number of tiles, and I'm going to solve for x, because that's the figure number, and that's what I'm trying to find. Solving this equation is rather simple. Subtract 12 from both sides, 542 equals 1x. So my answer is figure 542. So thankfully I did not draw that, nor did I make a graph that made up to 542. So that's your answer to question E. That's commonly a struggle for students. So make sure that when you try that on your own later, you ask questions, but do try to follow what was talked about here. If you keep it simple and know that X is figure and Y is tiles, all you got to do is plug in what you know. And you're going to hear me say that a lot if you have me in class. Plug in what you know. Now, the next example. The next example gives us different clues. Notice in this example that we are given one picture, figure 1, and we're given a graph, and we have to do all the other representations. So I always recommend students start with a table. We know our table is going to have figures 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 because that's the ones they want us to draw. Now I look at the other clues and I think about, what else do I know? Remember, Y is tiles. So I notice that I have figure 1 drawn, so I could probably count the number of tiles, there are 6, and put that in the table. Now, how can I use the graph? Now I gotta look at the graph. Let's take a look at 0. Notice that figure 0 has 2 tiles, because if I went to figure 0, I have to go up 2, y is 2, to get to a point on the graph. So figure 0 has 2 tiles. I could do that again for other figures, or I can look for the growth. You should notice that there's a plus 4 growth. 2 to 6, you added 4 tiles. We add 4 tiles again, we get to 10. And again, 14, and again, 18. So once you know the growth, building the table is very easy, which is why I recommend making the table. Now I have to write a rule and make the pictures. So let's try the pictures. Let's try the rule real quick. The rule, remember, mx plus b, so we have to find the number in front of x, and the number in front of x is always the growth. And the growth is 4, as I saw in my table. So 4x, that's my rule, plus figure 0. Figure 0, according to my graph, and now my table, was 2 tiles. So now I'm going to put 4x plus 2. That's the rule for this particular pattern. Last but not least, we're going to draw figures 0, 2, 3, and 4. Again, I recommend building up, so I'm going to start with figure 2, and then I'll work backwards to figure 0 later. So figure 2, here's what I know about figure 2. I know figure 2 has 10 tiles because of my table. Again, your table is your friend here. So I know I have to add on 4 tiles. The good news is there are many ways to do this. So you can add 4 all in the same spot, all in different spots, you decide. I'm just going to add 4, there's my picture. I'm going to add 4, let's see, 2 to each end. So I just made each side 2 longer. There are so many other ways to do this. So if you thought of something different and you kind of worked ahead, awesome. Ask your teacher, make sure it's right, but no matter where you add the 4 tiles, it will be right. As long as you're consistent, because this is figure 2, and we added those 2 tiles in those 2 corners. So now when I draw figure 3, I have to do the same thing. So I'm taking figure 2 and copying it down, and then I'm adding 2 tiles on the ends, just like I did for figure 2 to get that from figure 1. So the orange tiles show that I'm being consistent, doing the same thing every time. Figure 4, do it again. Add 2 tiles to both ends to make each side 2 longer. Now I have to work backwards. So when I go backwards from figure 1 to figure 0, I have to take off 2 tiles from each end. So notice I'm going to find those 2 tiles on each end, and that helps me draw it. I see that this would be 2 tiles going horizontally, like you see there. So the number one thing about drawing the pictures is be consistent, and that means do the same thing every single time. And we're doing the same thing every time when adding those orange tiles in the same spot every time. So now I got my pattern, my graph, my rule, and my table complete. I simply have to answer question D. So question D is asking how many tiles will there be in figure 100. So just like the last example, we want to use our rule. And we want to remember that Y is the number of tiles and X is the figure number. So we're going to use our rule and we're going to put 100 in for X and find Y. So plug in what we know. So in our rule, 4x plus 2, we're going to put 100 in for x. So it's going to be 4 times 100 plus 2. That's how I get y, because that's what the rule says. Y equals 4x plus 2. Doing the math, I get 402 tiles, because 4 times 100 is 400, plus 2, 402. So the answer for question D is 402 tiles. Again, question D, just like the previous example, question E, can be kind of hard for students. So make sure that you ask questions if you still don't know how to do that when you try your problems on your own. So hopefully this was a good review for you of the basics and some more ideas to make sure you don't make small mistakes along the way. So do your best and always remember y equals mx plus b, and remember what the m and b stand for. If you didn't write it down from this video, you might want to rewind it and find out what those mean again for the tile patterns. Good luck and ask your teacher lots of questions as you're trying the 2 problems on your own.